I think it's important to be like C.S. Lewis and have a dogmatic belief in objective value, objective truth, because really that is what's necessary to the very idea of a rule, which is not tyranny, and an obedience, which is not slavery. If you have rules that come from men, that come from instinct, from emotion, from pragmatism, from the needs of the day, and these rules are constantly changing, then you have slavery and tyranny, and you have no certain thing, and you really can't have capital. You can't have a sure future in which capital increases, right? Our show here, the David Tulis program, is about increasing capital here in Chattanooga and Hamilton County, and having better ideas that allow you, my listener, to understand your place here, right? You are here in God's providence, not by accident, not by contingency or mistake. And so while you're here, it's important that we think together about increasing our value to each other. Let's say that near me here in the studio is a woman. She's Japanese, 28 years old, and I'm standing in front of her and looking at her in the face, and I say, "Ma'am, please just stand right here and don't worry." And I turn my back on her, walk away, maybe 75 feet. I turn around with my equipment, and then I turn my nozzle at her in her direction and pull the trigger. And out from this nozzle streams a liquid squirt, a long squirt. It's a flame, and it arcs over to her, touches her, splashes over her, and immediately she falls to the ground. There's a momentary scream, and then there's a burst of flame as the fuel piles in upon her and liquidates this human being made in God's image. And there lies her body burning. You can see a few body parts, her shoes, one shoe is off to the side, and her skull is the largest lump there after a minute of flame, and she's just consumed by this fire. Now, if that happened, you would clearly say that I'm a murderer. I have destroyed an innocent human being made in God's image, and I hope you would say that I deserve capital punishment for doing that. I did without provocation. She had done me no harm. I was not defending myself lawfully. She was just a victim of my flame. Well, it's easy to see when we deal with individuals one-on-one that this is wrong. This is, God would say, a sin, and the magistrate would say it's a crime. Of course, the magistrate should say it's a sin too, in addition to being an actionable crime for which I should be put on trial and executed for murder, right? A crime which deserves the death penalty. Well, what happens if we take this woman, the same woman, and we put her in a city, Nagasaki, let's say, or Hiroshima, and then above the city, we explode a flash. There's a flash of bright light, and instantly she's incinerated. It was instantaneous for her. She is gone in a flash. Her body is turned to powder as it stands, and is blown aside as everything else around her is blown helter-skelter in a flash of flame and heat and a roar that you could say is deafening, but only if you're not too close to be destroyed by the blast. How is it that when we destroy a city, let's say Nagasaki, it's suddenly not a sin anymore? There's suddenly not a wrong committed here. We have an official narrative that justifies the terror bombing of innocent cities. There are other cities that have been terror bombed as well by the good people in Washington, and we support these terror bombings. We support them, we agree with them, and we see a necessity in doing it. How is it that when I do it personally and individually, it's a murder, but when we do it together in the context of war, suddenly it's not a murder anymore, and there's no wrong? The scale problem. I think what we have here is the scale problem. The larger something becomes, the harder it is to see right and wrong, especially when there seem to be national compulsions, national necessities, such as saving American lives, right? If we had to invade Japan, the thinking went, that would cost us 1 million men. Do we want to lose 1 million men, or do we simply destroy 100,000 innocent people as a demonstration of our power, a demonstration of how great we are, how mighty we are, how tired we are of this war in which the Japanese, have been retreating since about 1942, early 1943. It was all retreat by Japan. And then finally at the end, when we firebombed city after city with conventional weapons, destroying millions of people, probably 2 or 3 million people, burned alive by our incendiary bombs. We said, we've had enough, and we're going to do it again, this time with not 300 planes as over Tokyo, but in a single plane, a single B-29 bomber with a single dot falling out from the bays at high altitude, and rocking the explosion, rocking the plane along as it went off behind it over the city. How is it that that's not wrong? Well, it's not wrong because of the scale problem. And I think the scale problem blinds us to many things. We think of urban renewal, and we think of people such as Robert Moses, who brought urban renewal to New York after World War II. I'm holding up a book here that was given to me by our city's leading statesman, Dave Crockett, The Battle for Gotham, New York in the Shadow of Robert Moses and Jane Jacobs. I just started reading it last night. And it tells about this very problem in urban renewal, how perfectly working communities in New York were just wrecked by the grand scale and the vast plans for highways and redevelopment for government slum projects of the famous city planner Robert Moses, who was in many ways a tyrant. And Jane Jacobs, though, is fighting, you might say, the local economy battle against the centralized machine. Jane Jacobs, whose great book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, 1961, is a classic study, you might say, of local economy and the free market, and how the free market has solutions. It really does. And the free market and local economy allow for and envision the human scale, man to man, woman to woman, neighbor to neighbor, parts of town and parts of town, block by block. There is a human community that really develops among people who are left free without people coming into their affairs, destroying whole blocks of housing, whole blocks of businesses, and organizing everything according to a preconceived notion. And that's what Robert Moses did, organize large parts of New York by force, right, by compunction, and making life miserable for millions of people, and then leaving in his wake so-called organized communities. Jane Jacobs mentions in one part of her book a housing project that had a bit of a kind of a little garden patch in front of it, and everybody hated that garden patch. Everybody just despised it, and she finally got a hold of someone who actually had a reason for this conspicuous rectangular lawn that everybody just hated. A social worker is quoted as saying how people would mention this bit of lawn hatefully, just bringing it up themselves. And so finally, after hearing enough of what good is it and who wants it kind of responses that are not really explanation, a person said, nobody cared what we wanted when they built this place. They threw our houses down and pushed us here and pushed our friends somewhere else. We don't have a place around here to get a cup of coffee or a newspaper even, or borrow 50 cents. Nobody cared what we need, but the big men come in and look at that grass and say, isn't it wonderful? Now the poor have everything. And so the big men left that little patch of grass, and everybody hated it because it was a picture of condescension. It was a picture of how the thing that they planned, that the good people planned for the poor people, right? They have a little bit of lawn, that it's hated because it is a picture of the superior will over the common person, right? The superior superintending will of the planner over as against the individual who would never have planned something like that, because he would never have planned the whole neighborhood that was imposed upon the city by the federally funded planners. We have here the scale problem, and we're going to look at it today. I think there's a view ahead that I want to just mention, and that is the second Manhattan Project. And the question I ask is, how does moral responsibility operate on the people who are involved in the second Manhattan Project? The first Manhattan Project, of course, brought us the blinding flashes of light over 2 Japanese cities, in which hundreds of thousands of innocent people, right, people who had done no wrong, who had not committed any war acts, who had not been not contributed anything to hurting anybody, are just eviscerated by the Americans, who have, you might say, the scale problem, just as the Germans did, just as the Japanese themselves did, and just as the Soviet Union has. All of them major empires, major nation states. The problem with scale is exacerbated by the nation state. And I'd say even here in Chattanooga, we have the problem of the nation state. It may be in its senescence. It may be in decline, but in twilight even. But there are still the after effects of it, and we're going to be living with those for decades ahead. We're not going to be completely rid of the modern nation state for decades downstream. You, my listener, will already be in your grave, and your children will be showing a little gray on their eyebrows when the reports will suggest that maybe there is a new era ahead, and maybe we've been we're near the end of this closing era of the nation state, which has brought us the scale problem in a way that no other system of man has. Well, this is David Tulis, and we have a news blip here on several points that look at this scale problem and suggest that where there's mass force, mass compunction, where there is military power applied, especially to civilians, especially to common people, we have the makings of disaster. We're here at Nooga Radio, AM 1240 and FM 92.7, 95.3. HD4. David Tulis, we argue for local economy and the free market. We're brought to you by Nooganomics.com, the website for the man who matters. I argue that you should love your neighbor and you should buy local. The NAACP has made a recommendation. Dr. Eleanor Woods is the president. Yesterday in the Chattanooga.com gives a copy of her letter to the mayor, and she says that the assistant chief Edwin McPherson is the best candidate. Her committee of NAACP, National Association of American Colored People, reviewed 50 applications and narrowed the list down to 2. The top 2 were David Roddy, who's the chief of staff of the police department, and the other is assistant chief. They were both, according to her letter, well-prepared, knowledgeable, engaging, and are clearly qualified to lead the department. She says the city is, quote, lucky to have such fine men working to protect and serve its citizens. There was a vote by the board, and McPherson won. He has 25 years of experience in law enforcement. Now, I mentioned this. Well, she goes on to say, Chief McPherson is from Chattanooga. He knows the communities, and he cares deeply about every citizen. His passion to protect this city and punish those who attempt to cause harm here is evident, as is his willingness and ability to work with those who need his help, especially our at-risk youth. Now, the question I ask is there a reform interest in the NAACP? And the answer seems to be no. No, there is not a reform interest based on the language of this statement that is respectfully submitted to the committee for Andy Burke. That's looking. There are 5 people on that committee looking at this question. If you want to find out one encounter I had with one of the members of the committee, go to Nooganomics.com. And the story is that this man who is the CEO, Chris Ramsey, of Techtown, downtown, across from the right near federal bankruptcy court, he does not have a reform interest either, though he was willing to listen to what I had to say about it. And the story that I have is really less of his words, because he had very few to me as a member of the press, but what I proposed to him on your account. And that is to say, I tell people I represent you, my listener. Okay. And so when I say you, I represent my listener in this matter, whether it's an advertising contract or an encounter of that kind where I'm either speaking to someone or listening to what they have to say. Usually I like to listen and do the speaking to you, my listener, giving you the update on Chattanooga. But here we are, we're running out of time. And And the scale question is important. The question of scale, how when things get too large, things they don't have to make sense. They don't have to be human, and they can even, it would seem, appear to escape the claims of morality, escape the claim of an objective truth, an objective right and wrong that is always true, right? An objective right and wrong. I would say that's God's law, summarized in the Ten Commandments. That is always true, no matter how large the scale of operation, no matter how big the thing you're talking about in the way of human organization, whether it's a corporation or a country. These organizations and these large-scale enterprises do not escape and do not obviate and make nothing of these laws, right? These laws of right and wrong. And just because something is big doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't mean that it's necessary. It doesn't mean that it's good, or it doesn't mean that it's evil. But they tend to be evil because large enterprises, especially bureaucracies, depersonalize the acts of individual people who are on the staff. And it comes up when I chat with Peter Kirby today. He is a man from San Rafael, California, and a writer for activistpost.com. He has a book out, Chemtrails Exposed, a new Manhattan Project. Now, there are questions that we want to look at in the next minute here about the problems of scale and the problems of intervention. Intervention by government into marketplaces is almost always bad for the common person, because the common person doesn't have the advantage of the connected people such as Elon Musk. Elon Musk, without government subsidies, without government protection, his business would be a fail. All of his businesses would fail. They simply would not meet the marketplace requirements. And here's an example of what I'm talking about. The Wall Street Journal today has a story about Tesla sales in Hong Kong. Well, in March, there were almost 3,000 registrations of his electric car, and the spike, it was a spike, a grand spike from previous months in late 2016 and earlier 2017, because people knew that the subsidy for this car was about to end. In fact, it ended in March, on March the 31st. In April, there were 0 cars sold in Hong Kong, but the month before, under the subsidy program, the tax credit program, there were 2,939 cars sold. So when the car that sold for $75,000 suddenly went to the real market price of $130,000, well, how many buyers were there? No buyers at all in the month of April. So maybe the price of $75,000 is steep, you think, for a car, but the real market price is $130,000, and that's because Hong Kong had a favor for the electric vehicle. It wanted to make a point. It wanted to show its environmentalist credentials, and so had that break. But when it expired, the real market value of that car, the real price of that car, made it unsupportable and undesirable. Tesla welcomes government policies that support our mission and make it easier for more people to buy electric vehicles, Tesla says. However, our business does not rely on that. At the end of the day, when people love something, they buy it, the company said. Well, that just shows that many things that are governmental programs don't work. Think for a second about cash for clunkers. That took place under President Obama. It was a complete failure. It was an absolute failure for a couple of months when in 2009, when that program that was put out there to encourage consumer spending, right? It was part of an $800 billion package of tax credits and outright spending by the Congress, as President Obama tried to shore up the economy, as we say. Nearly 60% of the subsidies went to households who would have purchased during the 2-month program anyway, according to Daniel Mitchell, writing at Foundation for Economic Education. The rest accelerated sales by no more than 8 months. Moreover, the program's fuel efficiency restrictions shifted purchases toward vehicles that cost on average $5,000 less. On net, cash for clunkers significantly reduced total new vehicle spending over the 10-month period. And it was intended to create new spending, right? New spending for new cars. But the actual outlays in the new car market supposedly getting the benefit of this program that put older cars in the junk pile was negative. There was a negative impact. And Keynesian economics, which is socialistic economics, generally doesn't work. But here, we don't just have not growth. We don't just have lack of growth. We see the negative growth in that market. A completely wasted project that kept cheap used cars off the market. And that's who benefits from cheap used cars? Well, poor people do. If you have a program that takes cheap used cars off the market, then poorer people have to pay more for the cheap used car, right? Well, this is David Tulis, free markets and local economies. That's our argument. David Tulis, Nooganomics.com, our sponsor. Make sure you tune in every day here and at Nooganomics.
The Tennessee Valley's news, talk, and sports leader. Nooga Radio, AM 1240.